Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to be back for two reasons. For 2 weeks I was here one of the weeks, but I was real sick with that. For those who didn't know, I was being treated for skin cancer, pre-skin cancer. I didn't have the cancer yet, but they got to do this periodically. And when you go through that, it's chemotherapy on your skin. It's just like taking chemotherapy on your inside when you get cancer. And I guarantee you what, it makes you sick. So I was real sick with going through all that. It's like self-inflicted pain to get rid of it. But that's something I have to do because of my skin. I ruined it when I was a young person as a lifeguard and then a scuba diving instructor. So I was in the sun a lot. So that really didn't do us any good. So anyway, that's maintained again. So I'm feeling pretty good shape on that. And last week we were up in Chattanooga meeting with the brethren up there. We met with a new minister who's been associating with us to help serve in that area. And I won't mention his name right now because he carries credentials from another organization who doesn't like us. So the poor guy's he's going through some decisions because he felt like what he's seen from what God's been blessing our work, he really wants to be a part. So I said, just take your time. Let's see where God leads you and we'll go from there. So anyway, that works out. It's been working pretty good. And the congregation up there really appreciates him coming by. So we wanted to meet with it and meet with him and make sure everybody was on the same page and let the people know that we're in support of what was going on. And so anyway, it went very, very well. We had a good turnout. We had a business meeting after services to help them along, some of the things that they can do to work with. And which prompted one of the sermons I want to give today, which is kind of a carry-on from a feast sermon I gave. So I'm going to use that today as we go through the sermon. I also want to mention to you your prayers that we're in the middle of negotiating. I guess you have to call it negotiating. Trying to get people down here for speaking is actually not negotiating terms, it's negotiating times and availability to get people down here to get everything to work out for God's Unchanging Word for this year. One of the things I'm trying to do is to bring in a guest speaker for our national conference this year, which we didn't actually do that last time. So we actually got a potential right now of a person who works for WorldNet Daily, who was actually a former member of Worldwide who might be able to be down here. So pray that works out. We hope that it will. We've also been talking to two people who are actually doing the reenactments for the Battle of New Orleans, and both of those guys, they play the generals, General Packenham and General Jackson, for the reenactment for the 200th, and we told them about what we were doing as far as trying to take a different perspective. And a lot of people don't know this, but the Battle of New Orleans was a part of God's prophetic plan and the fulfillment of a promise way back of who America would be. Because had the British actually won it, in light of the scripture, here's two brothers basically fighting with one another, but the fulfillment of America's destiny and going all the way to the West Coast and having 50 states picturing a land of freedom, Jubilee, would have never taken place. Well, that story has never been told. I don't know if you realize that. A lot of the story has been told, but no one has ever taken that story, and I've been on the internet, and you can go look. It's not out there. Is taking the story of the Battle of New Orleans back to Abraham and his seed. And that's what we want to do. So when I'm trying to explain this in a short form to these two gentlemen, it's like talking to foreign. It's foreign to them. They don't know. But these two men are historians. And so they know a lot about the Battle of New Orleans. In fact, they're the ones who's been working on it. And one guy's been actually in the developmental stages of this for 10 years, Timothy Pickles. So when they communicated back to me, I went and typed. Now I know who I'm talking to, so I get these names I'm typing in, and another one's Stephen somebody. But one's from out in the East Coast, and Timothy Pickles actually lives here. And these guys are really big historians that have been on the History Channel and Discovery. And so when they find out how small we are, the negotiation comes to a quick stop. But anyway, I think that might still work. So here's the thing we have to develop, is that sometimes I'm thinking big. We need to be out to the world. And so when people look at who you are to see the website and all this information that's out there, they say, wow, this is a pretty good sized organization, because you see their credibility is on the line at the same time. You know, when you look at some of the things that they've done, they've been in features. And so, and they do this full time for a living, by the way. They get paid to do these kind of things. So when you talk to them about coming down here and say, we'll help cover some of your expenses, that really isn't very exciting to them, to somebody who does that. But anyway, we're still in good shape on that. I really think that might work. And then I got a call this week that there's a possibility that John Brown will still be here, despite my offending him. And he wrote and said all's forgiven. So WHNO, LaCie Broadcasting, took up the gauntlet where it fell apart here, and actually going to bring him down for something else, and said, looks like we're going to be able to get him on your show after all. So anyway, that might work. But this time it's on our terms, basically, so we don't have to compromise anything. So God, if it's in God's will, it happens. And so we got a lot of things in the works, so I'm very excited about that. One of the things I want to mention to you all is that every year we like to do an appreciation dinner, as Clayton mentioned. So we're hoping to this month to do an appreciation dinner, probably go over to the Chinese buffet after services. I'll let you know where it's at and the timing, but maybe in the middle of the month. So we got a lot of things we're trying to coordinate all at the same time. And so I'm trying to time that so we have a guest come down who actually writes quite often for the Journal. He and I have been in communication for the last few months, actually before the feast. And so the other prayer request here is that if this works out and he does come down, my goal here is that we need exposure, remember? So every time we bring somebody in, there's two things. We want to feed those that we serve with something, and this gentleman's able to do that. And second, we need exposure. Why would we bring someone down here? Well, he can drive in, so it really won't cost anything to have him here, and we'll be able to put him upstairs. Is that while he's here, we want to introduce him to the work that we're doing. And my hopes are that he'll go back and do a feature story in the Journal, which feeds the independent church communities. And so they will know who we are. And if you got your newsletter quarterly, you'll see that we're trying to put the project out now called the Gideon Project to help us start saving to get to the television. But that's only one aspect. The other aspect is to develop a network of associated churches who can serve one another while we build at the same time. So there's a couple different phases of it. So God's really given us the background of what we need to make this work. So anyway, those are all the things that, even though I hadn't been here, we've been very busy trying to develop and to coordinate. In the middle of all the communications and the Feast of Tabernacles and the people I meet with at the churches and traveling around, one thing that became apparent this year was the concern that some of the field churches have, the scattered church community. It's very easy to be involved in day-to-day or week-by-week church services and lose sight of a big picture. And it's in all these churches, everybody wants to see something happening. They want to see something taking place. And like one of the churches I recently visited, the concern is that we're not doing anything. And so we need a minister here. And that was one of the concerns that people said, we need a minister here. I said, well, it's not that difficult to get a minister to you, but that's not going to resolve your issues. It might make them worse. I said, a minister's going to come in, he's going to give a sermon. He's in charge of ecclesiastical affairs. So I asked the gentleman who was on the phone, I said, what are you going to do when he's gone? All right, so, I mean, they don't realize, seeing the way the church has been developed over the years from the worldwide, which is our family churches, it always came back to headquarters did all the work. You sent your money to them. They sent in the minister, and he told you how to live. And that's pretty much the way it was. What it did is it created a handicapped church. It created congregations who didn't function well by themselves because they didn't know how to get along, and learning the development of each person taking on a responsibility. And so what I began to do last week, which I'm hoping we'll be able to accomplish at the national conference this year, and I'm actually working into a sermon here, this is just not announcements, is begin to develop teams who are going to create a way to serve the needs of the churches at large. Whether they're associated, whether they're one of our churches, it doesn't really matter. But having the materials and having the wherewithal so that a local congregation can function. In the middle of all of that, there's something that's even greater and more important that God's called us to. And so while we're doing all of that, I didn't want to lose sight of, and I wanted to be able to help the churches to understand that what you're doing here was very important. Because you see, you come to church, you fellowship, you have a sermon, hopefully it's edifying. And for those who are speaking, and this tape will go out, if you're giving a sermon, you need to leave the congregation with something to think about. It should be, you go through the scriptures, edification, it should be uplifting, it should be powerful. Sometimes there's correction. And way too often there's too much correction. And so those kind of things doesn't do much but drive people away. Edification usually is a form of a correction. When you edify somebody, you should focus on what God says you're supposed to be doing. And when you get to doing that, person resolves in himself. And I can't tell you how many times I've given sermons that a person said, I felt like you were speaking right to me. I need to go home and correct this. And it wasn't a correction sermon at all. It was an edification sermon of showing the blessings that God does when you do things. And so when a person gives a message, they should be able to have a congregation go home and be able to do something, think about what they have, or think about what they need to do, motivate their lives, change their lives, work with family. But in the bigger picture, God's doing something too. So when he brings people together, why does he tell us in Hebrews, I don't have the scripture down, but so why does God tell us, forsake not the assembly? Do you know in the Church of God community today, many people feel like it's not important to fellowship anymore. People really feel like, I just stay home, I can watch a live sermon, I can watch tape, or I can get with my family. But God says you forsake not the assembly. See, there's a reason for that. Because, see, God's got a bigger plan. I want to talk about that bigger plan and how we're all involved in that bigger plan, scattered. Not together, but scattered, all apart, unified, while we're scattered. Because people today think that you can only be together if you're all in one organization. And that's not the way it is. Believe it or not, you go through the New Testament, it wasn't that way in the New Testament. They had their sects, they had their divisions, and I challenge anybody to find where Christ told everybody, y'all need to all be in one group. He didn't do it, did he? And sometimes when they said, well, they're not part of us, he told them, leave them alone. They're not against us, they're for us. So there's things that people today, through the fights, the challenges, the struggles, the power, the control, the money, things get lost. And what I want to do today is I want to talk about one of the first things that gets lost. It's the overall picture of the plan of God for individuals and field churches. So I want to talk about that today. And the sermon I'm delivering today is called Pockets of Power. Pockets of Power. And I'm going to draw some analogies. I want to draw some connections. I'm going to show some former, some latter, and what it's some of the things that God has laid out for that we can look at in the beginning to bring us to where we're going to be at the return of Christ. Because you may not realize that as we come in each week and go home each week, how valuable that is in our training by God. Because, see, we come here for edification, as the scriptures say that for not to forsake, we should be together. When we're together, God's using that time to edify and to teach each one of us. I tell you, it makes a big difference through the fellowship and association with one another. When the world becomes dark, and it's getting there now, it's going dark quicker than we ever imagined. And when you look back in the last decade, it's hard to imagine how fast things have changed. Is that there's becoming a time when people will be looking for light. They're going to be looking for hope. They're going to be looking for encouragement. And the only place they're going to find it is those who have it. And that light is Jesus Christ in us. And so as we come together, what God's doing is He's building families. Bodies of believers scattered all over the place, and God's doing the scattering. I'm going to show you that in just a second. So if I think I'm going to put them all back together in one pile, I'm fighting against what God's plan is, and I'm not going to win. I'm going to be setting myself up for failure and for a lot of heartache. So let's go back to the beginning, and I want to show you something, because God always says you can look to if you want to find out what's going to happen, look to the beginning. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go back and draw a few of these scriptures together and tie all this in, and hopefully I can get this accomplished in one sermon. If not, then I'll use one more. Because what I want to do today is I want to leave hope for all the brethren who are out across this nation, or whoever gets these DVDs, and now we're down in Trinidad and Virgin Islands, and of course over in Kenya, to let you know that you're not abandoned. And because you see, God's brought you together, and it's God who's going to be there to sustain you. So now let's go to Genesis 1. All right, let's draw some parallels here and get the big picture of where God's bringing us to as churches. All right, Genesis 1:1. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void." Now, if you look at the original text, that should be correctly translated, "And the earth became without form and void." It became. In other words, the earth was created in such a way, and you can look at the description of Satan in Ezekiel 28 and in Isaiah 12, that there's a time he's talking about when Satan was in that garden. That's when he was still Lucifer, light bringer. He was in that garden, and he's dressed and decked with all these wonderful attire and jewels. And he said he was perfect in all his ways while he's in the Garden of Eden. When you go back to Genesis, that has taken place long before Genesis 1:1 took place. So it was at that time when he was on this earth in a different form that he just brought the entire earth to wreck and void. Now, how long that was could be anybody's guess, till we reach Genesis 1:1. We don't know how long ago in God's plan that took place. I think it can be described and found, but it won't be, I don't think it's going to happen until Christ returns, through the plan of God and understanding Jubilee. The true Jubilee, going back thousands of years, thousands and tens of thousands of years. I think you'll find there's going to be a time plan that all God did this, and when it became the appropriate time, we find Genesis 1:1 takes place. So that we have the last 7,000 years of the plan going before a true Jubilee when we have the new heaven and new earth coming in. But there's no way, and somewhere down the road, God may open up scriptures and say, there's the answer. But until then, all we have is information leading us to that, where Paul says we know in part. All right, so now first thing we want to understand is that in Genesis 1:1 is the earth became void and darkness was upon the face of the earth, and the Spirit of God moved on the face of the waters. In verse 3, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now, if you read that in its context, just as it is, you're thinking day and night. You're thinking moon and stars and all that stuff, right? Now, as a child, that's what I thought when he said, "Let there be light." The problem is, the moon and the sun isn't created till later. All right, so if you're thinking when he said, "Let there be light," that's the moon and stars, you got it wrong. That's telling us there's a presence of God there. It's also showing us that there's like a movement of the earth beginning to take place, or revolvement, or movement. Because let's go to verse 14. Pick up in verse 14. I'll show you what I'm talking about. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day and the night." All right. Well, didn't chapter 1 verse 3 say, "Let there be lights," and there was light? But now we're down to verse 14, and then God said, "Let the lights be in the firmament of heavens to divide the day and the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years." So now we're beginning to see the plan of God being established through the pattern. And one of the things I learned when I was doing the Blood Moon Tetrad book, wow, the incredible information that's out there for the plan of God, if you only understood what the plan of God was, through the stars and through the comets and everything else that's going through, all the patterns that have been set in place from the beginning. And because they knew the patterns, they can tell you how far things are going to be out. And they'll tell you the constellations. And Job talks about all that. And all these things have been obscured. And the soothsayers and all these people who supposedly read palms and stars, they have taken the truth of God and perverted it. And so in the churches, we'd say, well, we can't look at any of that because it's pagan. No, it was God's and the pagans stole it. All right, so those are the things that you need to begin to say, well, there's something going on here. So now let's go on. So we know we got the times, the seasons, for days, for years, and let them be lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and it was so. Verse 16, and God made two great lights. The greater light to rule the day, which we know is the sun. Right? So here now we've got the sun being brought in. And the lesser light to rule also, but the night, and he also made the stars, and God set them in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over day and rule over night, and to divide the light from darkness. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the fourth day. So now we don't have the sun and the moon till the fourth day. And understanding the plan the way it was. Now, so when you're looking at, you're seeing when there was light, there's something we need to understand there. Because you see, in our life, when did we see the light? You know, it wasn't until God's Spirit moved upon us. All right, so now, let's understand now to the New Testament. Let's go to the New Testament in Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4. Now we see Christ coming back. He comes the first time in the presence of God giving him control to rebuild everything and to put it all back in its place. And so through the 7-day plan of God, Jesus Christ reestablished the earth in a perfect condition. 4,000 years later, Christ comes back, and look at the condition the world is in at this time. Matthew chapter 4, verse 12. This is following Jesus going and being tempted by Satan. All right, so when he's finished the temptation, you see in verse 12 that John was in prison. And he goes to Galilee, and leaving Nazareth, he came and he dwelt in Capernaum, which is upon the seacoast in the borders of Zebulun and Naphtali, that it might be fulfilled which is spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, in the land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali, by the sea, beyond Jordan, and Galilee of the Gentiles, the people which sat in darkness saw great light. Now, what you're seeing here is the specific parallel to Genesis 1:1. Is because Jesus' presence was there, so was light. So in Genesis 1:1, when you say, and it says, and there was light, that light is present without a moon or a sun or stars. The light we're speaking of is the presence of God. That's His Spirit. And so what we're looking at here is that by the time Christ comes and begins to go through his temptations and begins to rule, to take control back from Satan, the earth is dark. It has a moon, it has a sun, it has stars. But in essence, what God's saying, it's dark. The people which sat in darkness saw great light. It's talking about Jesus Christ. It's talking about his presence. And to them which sat in the region of the shadow of death, light is sprung up. So here we have, from the beginning, the presence of God comes in and brings light. It's totally void. Everything is dead. There is no life. Jesus Christ comes and brings spiritual life into a dark world at his first coming. The condition of his second coming will be no less different. All right, we need to understand that. When Christ comes back, the condition of this world is going to be dark. It's going to be almost lifeless. And I say almost because there's going to be light. And I'm going to show you how our calling and coming to meeting with other brethren is going to come into that. It goes on to say, in verse 17, it says, from that time Jesus began to preach and to say, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. not the kingdom in heaven, the kingdom of heaven is at hand, or the kingdom of God, as the other translations would say. All right, so here we have the parallel, or the understanding, is that the world without Christ is dark, that he's coming back. I brought in the scripture from the time that John was cast into prison. Why did I bring that out to you? Because you see, that's almost like it's out of context. Christ is going through, he's going through his 40 days of the temptation. Go read the chapter. In the middle of the chapter, God inserts John is cast into prison. Why? How does that relate to us? I see when God puts these scriptures in, sometimes it just jumps out at you like, well, that's almost out of context for the story. It's like a parenthetical insert that's been put into the scripture. Why did God put that there for us? It's because, you see, the light was in John. And so the problem was in the world at that time is that the world hated John because the light was in him. And God put that in for you and I because John was preparing the way for the return of Christ, was he not? Therefore, in understanding the parallel of light and dark and the spirit that is that you and I have the light of John in us, preparing the way for Jesus Christ. Again, at the end time when the world's getting dark. And it shows that they put him in prison and beheaded him. And it also shows us where the church is going, the ecclesia. When I say the church here, I mean the spiritual body of Christ. I don't mean an organizational structure, because the church is referred to as the woman. And that's what we're talking about here. Go to Matthew 24. And go to Matthew 24. Let's pull these connections together here. What I'm putting together for you here is to show you why we come together, the purpose for it, and the plan of God. So it's easy to go to church every Saturday and say, well, okay, I got my fed, now I went home. Or it's easy to say, I really don't feel like going. But there's a bigger plan that God's going on right now. And it's training. We're going through a training process to be able to, people have a hard time getting along with one another. You ever notice that? And it's funny in churches, most of the time people want to get along together, but everybody can't get along because they're fighting at odd purposes. It's because they don't understand certain things need to be done in certain ways. And so we simply have to get together and prepare. And so when things get really bad, who is God going to send the innumerable multitude to? God's not going to call somebody out of the world and not give them help. Just like with you and I, when you got called out of the world, he put us into a body of believers. All right, so Matthew 24, verse 21. For then there shall be great tribulation, was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be, and except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. Where is this going to take us to? God's telling us now that unless he cuts time short, this world is going back to the state of Genesis 1:1. It will become void again. That is Satan's plan. It says no flesh. That means every living creature on the face of the earth will be destroyed. That is Satan's plan, to destroy God's plan. All right? A total wasteland is what you're looking at. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. There comes in your part, like John the Baptist. We have been called. The only thing makes us different from the rest of the world is your calling. Do you realize that? Other than your calling out of this world, we were like this world. And it isn't by anything that we did of our own. God did that for us. I'm going to show you that in Isaiah in a few minutes. All right, so Jesus Christ comes, and Matthew 4 says, brings light to the world which sat in darkness. John the Baptist prepared the way for the light. You and I have been called to have that light in us. Go to Matthew chapter 5. Now, I know some of these are familiar scriptures with a lot of people, but we've got new people on the mailing list, and I want to make sure I cover some from time to time. Those who are new in the faith, who have not gone through this yet, and at the same time, put it in such a fashion that hopefully those of you old war horses who are sitting out here, that it might be fresh for you too. Because when I go through it and I put these things together, I get excited with them. Some of the stuff I've already knew, but when you see it, it's fresh, it's exciting. When you put it through and see how God planned, put together 6,000 years, and ties it all in through events that parallel one another. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's exciting. You see somebody greater than you and I got his hands in all of this. This is not just going to church on Saturday, hearing a sermon. It's like, I didn't get nothing out of that one today. Maybe he'll do better next time. Because it's bigger than you and I. This is a plan of God that God has had in the works from eons of time, long before Genesis 1:1. When you look at when Jesus Christ says, who was sacrificed before the world began. That means way back when Satan began with his sin, Jesus Christ accepted the plan to go and sacrifice his life for you and I. And here you are after almost 6,000 years of human existence, and the plan is still in place, and now you're not an outsider, you're a participant. I mean, how powerful is that? I mean, to be a part of that plan, to see what's going on. Do you realize that when you realize your calling, you're not just getting up to go to church on Saturday, you're getting stuff right in the middle of the plan of God. How important is that? It's not just going to church. And I'm afraid that the churches have lost sight. Why? Because they're fighting about who knows what. You know, when we realize the bigger picture, it helps overcome the small problems. You know, it really doesn't matter you got your feelings hurt last week about somebody. Does it? It really doesn't. Not in the bigger plan of it. It might have hurt at the time. You might have got offended. But you can wash that out and put it aside. And if you look at it from a bigger picture, you realize that, wow, I've been called to be a part of a plan that God has laid out here for 6,000 years. And your part may help somebody down the road. And I'm going to show you that in just a few minutes. Now let's go back to Matthew 5, verse 14. It says, and you are a light of the world. All right, so the Spirit that was in God, Jesus Christ, at your baptism now, that light is infused in you. It's a part of you. You can't separate it. Only you can take it out. You can take a light and turn it off and go back into the world. But when the world sees this, when you read Matthew 4, and when it says, and the region that sat in darkness saw great light, do you realize that God has given you that power? Because He's placed His Spirit in you. That's not something to be taken lightly. So that wherever you go, they should see light in you. All right, now let's put this in reality here. What did they see? They saw this incredible person bringing about power, bringing about God, talking about His plan, talking about the return of Jesus Christ, giving them hope. Because you see, you're going to be the only hope that's going to be out there. And they should be able to look at you and feel inspired and uplifted. You know, every now and then I'll think about, I don't know who the lady was, to be honest with you. There was this trailer park we went to. Didn't look like much. Gilbert and I, many years ago, to go clean this mobile home. We went in with this mobile home, and the spirit of that lady was so impressive. It was so uplifting that when we left there, we looking at each other and said, you feel different? I said, yeah, I do too. I said, you feel better? He goes, yeah, I feel better. The lady left, when we left that lady's house, we were edified. And it was just the spirit of that person was uplifting. Everything that she had was a character of God. And so when we go into the world, that's what they should be seeing in us. Because you see, there's something else that's going to be seen. Satan's going to see that light also. And he's not going to like it. I remember teaching leadership classes, and one of the things we talked about, lights draw a lot of things. They draw bugs. In the summertime, you ever turn a light on, all these bugs? All right, go to Revelation chapter 12. John drew a lot of bugs, John the Baptist. He drew a lot of bugs, got him killed. But Christ says he's going to protect his people. Now, I know there'll be a martyrdom, and don't get me wrong, I know there's a martyrdom coming. Look at Revelation 12, but that's not going to be for everybody. There's going to be some that will go through it, but for the majority of God's people, from what we can understand from God's scriptures, you're going to be protected. Revelation 12, verse 17. And the dragon was wroth with the woman. Now, who's the woman? That's you guys sitting in church every week. That's the ecclesia. That's the body of Christ. And I don't care what title you have. And I'm afraid that some of the churches are going to have a real problem by them saying we're the only church. We're the only ones God's using. I think there's going to be a lot. People are going to have a lot of rude awakenings when they're going out, because you see, God decides who he wants to use. In fact, with Israel, he got tired of fooling with Israel. He went to Gentiles. And, they're going to, just like with Israel, they're going to have a rude awakening. A lot of people in the churches of God's going to have a rude awakening. They realize that God's the one who's in charge, and he will use who he wants to use. That's none of our business who else he wants to use besides us. Let's just hope for this. He uses us too. Let's hope for that. And I'll be honest with you, I'm excited when I see other churches doing things. That makes you feel good to see that the work of God is going on. So the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. Who is that? That's you all. The remnant of the seed. You're going to see that's the scattered seed, which keep the commandments of God, 1, have the testimony of Jesus Christ, 2, and there's one more thing that we're going to go to in another scripture. So now let me ask you this. What is the testimony of Christ? All right, we know we have to have a couple of things. We have to have, first of all, we have to have the ability to keep the commandments. God gives you that. First of all, you got to know what the commandments are. The world has taken the commandments and twisted them all around. They don't even know what the commandments are anymore. The people think that Sunday is the Sabbath day, and they begin to move other scriptures around and remove one, combine a couple of others, and they'll make them what they want them to be. All right, so you have to know the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments are, and it's found in Exodus chapter 20. The second is very important, and I'm afraid that many people are getting away from this, is that Satan is going to know who the remnant are by the testimony of Christ. What's the testimony of Christ? Well, let's let the scripture tell us what the testimony of Christ is. And you will find that, let's see to my next scripture, Revelation 19, verse 10. Revelation 19, verse 10. It says, and I fell at his feet to worship him, and he said to me, see that you do it not, for I am a fellow servant. He's talking to one of the angels that was sent to John. It says, I am a fellow servant and of the brethren to have the brethren which have the testimony of Jesus, worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. And so, I get called down by church members from time to time, say, oh, we just want to talk about prophecy. And believe it or not, there's churches that don't want to talk about prophecy anymore. So now when I see one of the things that I'm supposed to be doing, what's going to make the enemy mad, is because you're talking about prophecy. And we've been really blessed in our church, and I hope you understand that many times that I'd be tempted to talk about a subject matter, but it's like, man, I don't know, I don't think this is needed at this time. And sure enough, whatever looked like it was needed just goes away. But every now and then there's certain things that are important that seem to fit into the plan of God. Talking about like the persecution of Christians. We were blessed to be one of the first churches to actually bring out the persecution of the Christians going on before the news started talking about it. And it become a big issue now in the persecution that's going to be taking place in America today. In fact, the quarterly we just put out, hopefully everybody got yours in the mail, talking about the persecution in America. We've been talking about this is going to be coming for about 10 years now. And you're beginning to see it rise up in America, taking away your freedom. The prophetic points have to be brought out. And they have to be brought out because it makes Satan mad. What does that do? That helps inform people what's coming down the road. And so we talk about the testimony of Jesus Christ. There's one more thing that we have to have. And quite often that's one of the first things that leaves. It's found in John 13. John chapter 13. in verse 35. John 13, verse 35. And by this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. You know, in this, there's a delicate balance, I guess you might want to call it. But love has to be priority. We keep the commandments and we have the testimony of Christ out of love. It can't be the other way around. Because I see so many people, and I came out of congregations in the past where there was a rulership instead of a leadership. It was a rulership. And it seemed like where you would want to have compassion and love for somebody is there was a bitterness and it was an attack and a put down for people who were struggling to go through things. You know, when you look at a person and say, you can't come to church till you overcome this habit. Man, I mean, how many people got all perfect habits? Who picks and chooses? Where's that in the commandments that you can pick and choose that you got a bad habit that we don't agree with, that you can't come to church? So you begin to see those things in the rulership instead of leadership is done out of domination instead of compassion. And so one of the things that the people who are becoming out of the tribulation, you know what they're going to have to find? Compassion. They're going to have people who can love them despite some of what they've been through and help them overcome. Now, at some point in time, a person who comes to church and doesn't want to change, that's going to be obvious. I'm not talking about that. But we're talking a person who's trying to overcome and trying to live a godly life and who's struggling. Who knows that person hasn't gone through a divorce or lost a loved one? So when you think about the tribulation, because this is where we're being trained for, we're being trained to be ready to feed those before the tribulation and then to take rulership with Christ when we have the proper heart. Rulership with Christ when he says for 1,000 years. We do not have rulership today. I challenge anyone, show me that in the Bible. We don't have. Now, somebody might want to pull a scripture out. It says, respect those who have authority over you. That's different than rulership. That means that someone has acquiesced to the fact that, okay, this person is responsible for the congregation. It will serve him in that capacity. How does the person serve that individual or that congregation? In the same way a husband does a wife with love, compassion for family. Not through rulership. We do not have the perfect heart to rule in this lifetime. We just don't have it. But we will have when we become perfect like Christ in the millennium when we will rule and reign with him for 1,000 years. All right? So then we get into that stage. We've been through this life. We'll know what it's like to overcome. We'll know what it's like to fail and still be able to work with one another. So at that stage, we begin a rulership with Christ. But until then, we're in learning. What will we be ruling over? Have you thought about the millennial? There's so many scriptures. I wrote them down. You think about the millennium and think about, rain in due season. The lion with the lamb. We talk about all these perfect scenarios that you see in the millennial reign. When you start ruling, it's not going to be that way. You realize that? When you start ruling, you're going to start working with Christ, ruling in a world that has become as nearly void as it could possibly be, where Jesus Christ has stepped in with scripture we just read, right before there's no flesh saved. Jesus Christ cuts time, and that's what you're going to be given to rule with, to start off with. Go back and read the scriptures. A tithe of mankind alive. A third of the world burn up. Plagues and sicknesses, devastation. So when you come in, you're going to find whoever's left has gone through some kind of tragedy that needs help. And you're going to be picking up a world as close as it possibly can to total void and darkness. And that's where we're going to start ruling and working. And if you think you're going to do it with an iron-fisted hand, no. You're not going to make it. That's part of the learning process that we're going through today, is that we have to learn how to be able to be compassionate with one another today. Understand that we don't condone the weaknesses and sins, nor will we tolerate them in the church. but we will accept the people who is trying to overcome and put them out of their lives, just like with us. When you think about the tribulation going into it, it talks about miles of blood and people laying everywhere. It's going to take some years to put things back into place. And Jesus Christ, it's wonderful what it says in the Bible. It says he'll restore things back in one day. Now you think not 24 hours. That's 1,000 years to Christ. So he's going to take 1,000 years to put everything back in its proper order. Then there's the second resurrection. And then those people will come along, and you'll have a short period of time right then. And we'll get a chance to work with them. And all of those who've overcome through the 1,000 years will get a chance to work with them also. Who else is going to be in that tribulation that's going to come through in that 1,000 years? Possibly some of your family. If you're alive, if I'm alive, at the return of Christ, there are family members that I have that are not in the church. They do not qualify to be first in that resurrection until God calls them. They might before Christ returns, I don't know. But wouldn't it be nice if we could make a difference now? And the light they see in you could make that change before Christ returns and they'd be a part of that first resurrection? Or transferred in, become spirit beings at that time? If not, it is possible that God will save those, and there's enough in the Bible to show that everyone's got to go on in their own coattail. You're not going to get a spirit being until you've repented. But God does show that he does show mercy to family. Remember Rahab? Saved the entire family, didn't he? All right. So why not us? Why would not God save your family too? Even if they didn't agree or understand. Why not? And that means they will be physical beings if they're not called. They will be in that 1,000 years as a physical being that you will have a chance to bring them to the truth. Does that make any difference when you come to church on Saturday now, when you think about those things? You see, if we lose picture, and you know what the problem is? There's not enough education in the churches right now to get the picture out there. Because everybody's being torn into so many different directions. Fighting about a new doctrine, or fighting about a new wind of this, and a new thing for that. And people can't even get along with each other anymore because they've lost track of the basic core foundations of what the scriptures are. You know, I recently had an email that someone took me to task and about the comments I made about President Obama saying it doesn't matter which God you pray to. You know, and it was done in a nice way. And so, you know, I did. I thought about that quite hardly. And so I had to write back because they said we shouldn't be in politics. So I think about that. I said, is it politics? No, actually, I don't think it's politics. But here's the question I returned with. What happens when politics steps across the line into religion? What happens when politics begins to dictate my worship? What happens when the government begins to control what I can say or think or teach, or how I live and who I want to worship and preach? Then we have a responsibility before God to stand up and say, this is not the way it is. And people don't understand that. And I understand that. And I'm going to show you, I won't have time today, but I guess I will take two parts with this because I want to bring a little more development into the churches to show how important it is for us. And I have some examples that I want to bring out. Because you see, at some point, we have to be able to be that light, to stand up when the world is saying, this is the way walk you in it, and you will say, no, this is the way we walk. Because then you will become like John the Baptist. Because see, John the Baptist, he went against the authority of the day. Now, when you make a statement like that, the comparison was that David would not raise his hand against Saul, who was the king. Okay, I thought about that. Did I raise my hand against the king? No. Or the president? No. I simply said that this is wrong. And until we can stand up and boldly say that this is the way, walk ye in it, then we're not doing our job. Because you see, I see that the young people are out there who are listening say, well, it doesn't matter whose God I pray to. That means there's an acceptance in the community of this nation that honestly believes there's more than one God. If you can accept that statement, then you have no longer accepted the first commandment, which says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And so we need to learn how to do this and do it out of love and out of compassion. And so I simply wrote the gentleman back, show me how I do, and I went through the scriptures. Cry aloud and spare not. How you warned what's coming. How do you become that witness, and how do you stand up for the truth when the government steps into the religion? It didn't end it well. But there's going to be more and more of that, like who gives us the right as a church to be able to do that. All right, so here's what we got now. Let's pull this together. So where we're at right now. We see that the world will always go back to decay without God. In the beginning, Christ came and his Spirit moved across the waters and there was light. When Jesus Christ came 2,000 years ago, it says there was light, showing his presence again. He took that light, and when he died, it opened the door for the light to be in you. Now, it also says that before he comes back, it will be black and dark again and void unless he cuts time short, except for those that he's called out. Now let's go to Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 1. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 7. Isaiah 1, verse 7. It says, your country is desolate. Your cities are burned with fire. Your land, strangers devour it in your presence, and it is desolate. Wow, when you see what happened over in Missouri last week, man, these scriptures start jumping out. I mean, the fires, the looting, the burning. You know, I was absolutely totally amazed nobody got killed yet. They're not finished. They were rioting again this morning on the news when I saw. And they're affecting people who had nothing to do with it. They're affecting people's lives and businesses had absolutely nothing to do with what happened in Ferguson. So now they spread it across the nation. And it's putting this nation in a spirit of revolt. Just looking for ways to be able to bring things down. And eventually it's going to rise. It's going to happen. Eventually it's going to rise to a point that will be so bad that the United States will be brought to a lockdown. Where civil disobedience will be brought up to a point that it will be government control. You will see it happen one day. I don't know how long that'll be. But it's moving in that direction. And then who's ever in charge at that time will have control. They'll have control to do a lot of things. All right, so going on. It says, your strangers devour in your presence. It is desolate and overthrown by strangers. So you got blocks over there in Ferguson. You look at just total wasteland now. Total wasteland. It says, and the daughter of Zion is left in a college in a vineyard, and as a lodge in the garden of cucumbers, and besieged the city. In verse 9, except the Lord of hosts had left us a very small remnant. So here we are, we're looking at toward an end time when it talks about God left us a very small remnant. You're talking about a handful of people in a scheme of the plan of God, of the people that's on this earth, a very small remnant. Now, that's one more thing to put on the table about worshiping with one another when you go to church. That God has put in your power a part of that very small remnant. All right? We would have all been like Sodom, and we would have all been like to Gomorrah. And that's why when I hear things that affect the future of this nation and our youth, if we don't speak up, how do I go before God? Because leaving things the way they are, nobody saying anything, we would all become like Sodom and Gomorrah. So now, here we are moving to an end time. We have the scenarios all laid out, and we know that at some point in time before Christ returns, if it wasn't for what God just says here in Isaiah, except for that handful of people, bringing it back to Matthew 24, it says, unless he cut time short, because of those people, he's going to cut time short. We would have this earth would become totally void again. You realize, but the fact that of us focusing on God, following our calling, that all of these things that we go through every single week are important. It's a training ground. It's worth getting our feet stepped on and being offended from time to time and learning to get a thicker crust and not a thicker heart, and still love with the compassion to forgive those who try to come against you. Because you see, at the end time, it's also going to go back to like it was in the New Testament. You realize that? What happened in the New Testament? Persecution came in the church. I'm going to show you that. I'm going to just give you two more scriptures and I'll bring this to a close. Let's go to Daniel 12 while I'm talking. All right, Daniel chapter 12. Daniel chapter 12. And so what we've done is we've tied in the parallels of the lightness and dark. We taught the parallel of the Spirit of God and darkness. We've tied in the parallel at the time of Christ and taking the light and passing it on to us, the called out ones and the remnant. There's one more thing that parallels the New Testament church that's going to be like at the end time. In Daniel chapter 12, and I'll pick it up in verse 4. But you, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book even to the end of time, for many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. This is also talking about the knowledge of God. Because what he's talking about here is the scriptures that God gave him, Daniel didn't understand. So he's going to say, I'm going to reveal these things toward the end time. Do you know this scripture that I'm about to read all the way up until around verse 10, verse 14? That was not understood in the worldwide church of God back in the 70s. You realize that? The scripture where God says till the end, because it wasn't time yet. The scenario of the church back when I came in the 70s, and some of you even in the 60s, was there's going to be this big, powerful work, a last-minute push to warn the world. There would be a falling away, but those are rotten Laodiceans anyway, so let them go. Remember that? All right, but the rest of us that are holy and pure, we're going to be taken away. We don't preach a rapture, but we're going to be raptured away to a place of safety somewhere. All right? That's what was going to be done. And then Christ is going to come back. Now, that isn't the way God lays it out here. Let me show you what he's talking about. All right, going on. Knowledge shall be increased. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood on the other two, the one on one side of the bank of the river, and the other on that side of the bank of the river. And one said to the man clothed in linen, which is upon the waters of the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held in his right hand and on his left hand to heaven, say that he swore by him that lives forever. So here you're seeing that he's holding his hand up. He's saying, before God, I'm telling you when this is going to be. He says, but it shall be for times and a half. We're talking about the time when this knowledge and information would become clear, would before when? The 3.5 years of the tribulation. All these things are beginning to come together. And when he shall have accomplished the scattering of the power of the holy people, these things shall be finished. So now, who am I to think that I can put the churches together when God's saying right at the end time, when God is finally finished scattering the power of the holy people, that everything's going to be accomplished? All right, so that's what God's saying, that he's doing it. All right? God says he's going to scatter them, but why? Why would God do that? Well, because we can understand the parallel of what happened before, we can understand what's going to be toward the end. There's a number of reasons. Usually the reason it comes about, eventually it comes back to the plan of God. Usually it comes about is because we're doing something wrong. You realize that? Most of the time when God begins to break something down, it's because we're doing something wrong. But even in that plan, God knew that we would be doing something wrong, because power corrupts. When you got this much organization, this much money coming in, hundreds of millions of dollars every year, and all this power, there was corruption. I'm sorry, there was. But in the middle of it all, God had a plan anyway, and he says, when all these things, he's going to scatter that power. So he had a plan. Why? Because it's kind of like ants. You ever hit an ant pile when they're all together? If you can keep them in that ant pile, and kill them, you can kill them all at one time. But boy, go put your foot in it or a stick in it and watch what happens, and then go try to kill them. They're everywhere, man. They move out so fast. It's like that with the churches. Look at the New Testament. Let's go to Acts chapter 8. All right, Acts chapter 8. Wait, before I go there, let's look at one scripture while I'm here in verse 10. Because it ties into what we're talking about so I don't have to come back here. All right, same chapter, verse 10. It says, and at that time, it said, many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do so wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. So in the middle of all of this, what are we looking at? In the middle of all this scattering of the power, many are going to be made white. All right, so you got the called out ones. You got what's called God called the elect. Isaiah just said they're the remnant. Matthew 24 said if it wasn't for the elect, no flesh would be saved. So while God's got these people in place, where are they? They're not huddled in one church somewhere. They're scattered all over the place. When God's finished scattering, and evidently there's not a finished scattering yet, is that while they're all scattered, many are being purified and made white. Through what? Through a tribulation of 3.5 years. God puts those people into care of others. So now let's go to the New Testament. All right, Acts chapter 8. Acts chapter 8. We're going to go through here. And start reading in verse 1. All right. And Saul was consenting unto his death. I'm talking about the death of Stephen. Stephen, who was a deacon at the time. All right. God filled him with power and was able to preach. And I got to tell you a little side story. This is real funny how the worldwide wanted to control things. Well, I was at it was actually the first ministerial conference I was ever invited to. And there's a couple hundred people there. And so I'm listening to this information. I wasn't ordained yet at the time, but I was invited to be a part. And so Mr. Armstrong was talking about at the end time, there'd be times of Stevens. There's enough plan for God to have Stevens at the end time would be persecuted. And he says, deacons. He says, I know some of you ministers from the worldwide feel that only ministers can preach, but he says, this was Stephen who was a deacon. He said, at the end time, there's going to have that. And I'm listening to some of these things and say, this is pretty informative because it's totally different from all the training that I had. So I'm sitting around dinner, there's a whole bunch of people, and one of the ministers brought up, they were talking about those comments. This is how control sets into, when I talk about corruption. The minister says, well, I'll tell you one thing, there's no deacon in my church is going to stand up and do this and be persecuted in my congregation. If that's going to happen, that's going to be me. So, and I'm listening to arguing that a deacon didn't have a right to do what Stephen did. Honest to goodness, that was the argument. That deacons did not have the right without the minister's permission to stand up and preach like he did. And he said, that's why he got himself killed. I was like, my goodness. What was that? I almost went home and said, man, I don't want any part of this. Honest to goodness, and that's how corruption sets in leadership of authority. That a deacon did not have the right because he didn't get permission from the minister to give that sermon that got him killed, and that's why he was killed. And they're sitting around this table arguing that point. You know, I'm the new kid on the block, so I didn't say anything. I'm just shaking my head like, I don't hear what I'm believing. If you go on to read the scripture that God was so magnified in what he was going through, he opened up the heavens and Stephen got to see God on the throne. You know, I don't see that as a bad thing here. Stephen's name was glorified as one of the first martyrs in the New Testament. So you can see why God had to scatter the power, because there was corruption holding down the Spirit of God. Right? So the original church is taught, and this is for those who've been in the church and for new, when you begin to hear some of the stories, is that only the ministry had the authority to preach. But that isn't what it was showed in the New Testament. But it was never preached. So let me go on now. It says that Saul was consenting unto the death, talking about Stephen. And at that time there was a great persecution against the church was at Jerusalem. So while we're seeing the light growing right, with the return of Christ and the plan of God setting in place, a great persecution comes on. At the end time, it's going to happen again. So what happened? What was God's plan when this took place? All right. Was it to take one big group, take them off somewhere and protect them? Was it just the ministry that was supposed to do the work? Like the person who told me, well, we got problems in our congregation. If we just had a minister, we can get over this. I said, no, that's not the answer. That's not your answer. And I said, let me come up and talk to you about what your answer is. I said, because the minister's going to come in, he's going to give you a sermon, hopefully it edifies you, but he's going to leave. What happens then? It's up to the congregation. Is you need to strengthen and unify a congregation to work together, that everyone has a part and a responsibility to do the work. Because, see, God holds each one of us accountable for the gifts he gives each one of us. Do we just show up for church, hear a sermon, and go home? Is that good enough for God? Or does he have something greater in store for you? And that's what we're trying to bring out, all the gifts that we can bring out in the people. So what happened here will give us the insight at the end time. All right, going on. So they were scattered. It says the persecution against the church which was at Jerusalem, they were all scattered abroad throughout all the regions of Judah and Samaria, except, isn't that amazing how God puts this in here now? Except the apostles. All right? So now they're all scattered abroad. The apostles remained in Jerusalem, but the power of the holy people is scattered. Very similar to what we're talking about at the end time that we've seen in Daniel. Those scriptures were never preached years ago, only because they were probably not understood. But we're getting closer to the time where we need to understand this. Going on. And so devout men carried Stephen to his burial and made great lamentation. In verse 3, it was very important. Now we see why in verse 1 it said, except the apostles. And as for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering into every house and hailing men and women, committing to them in prison. Verse 4, therefore they that were scattered abroad went everywhere preaching the word. Who went preaching the word? When the apostles. They were still in Jerusalem. They never left. Everybody in the church, the scattering of the power of the holy people. Who was the power of the holy people? It wasn't the body. It was the ecclesia. It's the Spirit of God in each one of us, like at the end times, is going to be scattered abroad. What is God doing? He's building pockets of power, scattering across the nation, securing a place for when those who are called during that 3.5 years that we just read in Daniel, where they have washed their robes and made themselves white, which we're going to see in the next sermon in Revelation, the innumerable multitude. Why? So he can put them in protection of people who care and love his people, who keep the commandments, who have the testimony of Christ, and have the love of God in them. So what God's doing, he had to break down the corruption to bring it back to where it should have been to begin with, putting the power within God's people. What is God doing? He's building pockets of power across this world so that people will have a place to go of refuge. People who love and care one for another, who service God first and above all, and who have enough love for those people who have gone through that tribulation to care for them. When you go to church next Saturday, you think about all of that. It makes a big difference. You're not just here to hear a sermon. You're here to go through a conversion process to become a child of God, filled with the Spirit, lighten up the world to become that powerhouse that God can use to help change people's lives. We'll talk about that in the next sermon, in part 2. Of building pockets of power. Is the sermon, I think I called it, Pockets of Power. Pockets of Power.